The cold I can handle. You get used to 40 degrees if you have the right layers, the merino wool base, the mid-layer fleece, the heavy Gore-Tex shell. Your body learns to regulate, to hoard heat in the core. That's just biology. But I cannot get used to the silence. Not anymore. There is a specific kind of silence that happens in the deep boreal forest when the wind dies and the snow absorbs every vibration. That's a heavy, cotton-thick silence. They call it anechoic. Now, sitting in my apartment in downtown Toronto, surrounded by the hum of the city, I flinch every time the refrigerator compressor cycles off. In that sudden gap of sound, that brief vacuum of white noise, I am back there. I can hear the blood rushing in my ears, and I can hear the snow crunching. Not the erratic crunch of a deer, but the rhythmic, heavy depression of weight. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It has been 6 months since I came back from the Nakina trip. My therapist tells me I need to process the narrative to rob it of its power. She says trauma is just a memory that has not been filed correctly. So here is the file. Here is the raw data, unmixed and unmastered. I am an acoustic ecologist. It's a niche field, I know. Most people take photos, I take sound. I travel to the quietest places left on Earth, the zero zones, to record pure, anthropogenic-free nature soundscapes for universities, meditation apps, and museum installations. I am 34 years old, single, and meticulous to a fault. My life is a grid of frequencies and decibels. I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in sound waves, hertz, and signal-to-noise ratios. I am the guy who hears a floorboard creak and checks the humidity levels, not the guy who grabs a crucifix. The trip was supposed to be a cleanse. I had been commissioned by a German wellness tech company to capture 48 hours of deep winter silence for a new high-end sleep aid device. They wanted the cleanest audio possible. No planes, no highways, no chainsaws. Just the wind in the black spruce and the shifting of the ice. I planned the logistics with military precision. I rented a cabin that was barely on the map, an old trapper's outpost retrofitted for off-grid stays, accessible only by a private logging road that had not been plowed in weeks. I took my 2021 Toyota 4Runner, fitted with studded Nokian Hakkapeliitta tires and a rooftop cargo box full of backup gear. I packed enough food for 10 days, even though I only planned to stay for 5. I left Toronto at 4:00 a.m. on February 12th to beat the GTA traffic. The drive north is a slow shedding of civilization. You watch the brands change. The Starbucks and Whole Foods of the South give way to Tim Hortons and Canadian Tires, which eventually give way to independent gas stations selling erratic varieties of beef jerky and bait. By the time I passed Sudbury, the radio stations had dissolved into static. I plugged in my iPhone 14 and switched to a downloaded playlist of ambient drone music. Stars of the Lid, Brian Eno. Felt appropriate. I wanted to acclimatize my ears to the slow drift of the north. I stopped in Hearst for gas and coffee. The air at the pump already had that metallic bite to it, the kind that freezes the hairs inside your nose instantly. I bought a large dark roast, black, no sugar, and 2 packs of Jack Link's teriyaki jerky. I remember the cashier, a woman in her 50s with a faded perm, looking at the 4Runner packed to the gills. "Going far?" she asked. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. A low 60 hertz buzz that grated on my nerves. "Just north of Nakina," I said, tapping my card. "Field recording work." She squinted. "Be careful up that logging road. The wolves are aggressive this year. Hungry." Had a trucker say he saw a pack taking down a moose right on the shoulder of 584. "I'll keep my eyes open," I promised. I was not worried about wolves. Wolves are predictable. They follow the biology of hunger. I understand biology. The final leg of the drive took 4 hours. The landscape flattened out into the endless, repetitive barcode of the Canadian Shield. Spruce, rock, snow, spruce, rock, snow. Hypnotic. You can lose time out there. The sun began its early winter descent, casting long violet shadows across the highway. The heater in the Toyota was set to 22 degrees, blowing dry, warm air that smelled faintly of the new car, scent Triadi hung from the mirror. a chemical vanilla smell that I usually found comforting but now felt cloying. I turned off the highway onto the access road around 3:30 p.m. The Forerunner handled the snowpack well, the suspension absorbing the ruts of frozen mud beneath the ice. This was the part one usually loved. The disconnection. No cell service. The little bars on the dashboard screen went from 1 to 0. No service. Felt like taking off a tight shoe. I was alone. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the endless white tunnel of trees. I felt safe. I felt bored, actually. And looking back, I would give anything to feel that specific, heavy boredom again. The cabin was exactly as the coordinates described. A squat, rectangular structure built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to a silver gray. It sat on a slight rise overlooking a frozen oxbow lake, backed by a dense wall of black spruce. There was no romantic cottagecore aesthetic here. This was a functional shelter. A metal chimney pipe jutted out of the tin roof at a jaunty angle. I killed the engine. The silence hit me instantly. In the city, silence is just a lack of immediate noise. Here, silence is a physical pressure. Presses against your eardrums. I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, just listening. The engine block ticked as it cooled. Ting, ting, ting. The sound was impossibly loud, like a hammer striking an anvil in a library. I stepped out. The snow was knee-deep, with a hard crust that broke under my sorrel boots with a sound like snapping styrofoam. The air smelled of nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was too cold for scent molecules to travel effectively. It was 28 degrees Celsius according to the dashboard thermometer. I began the load-in. This is my ritual. Structure creates safety. First, the survival gear. The Coleman dual-fuel stove. The Plano trunk filled with dried goods, Mountain House freeze dried stroganoff, oatmeal packets, a brick of kicking horse coffee beans. Second, the sleeping gear. My Marmot 40 sleeping bag, the kind that makes you look like a mummy. Third, and most importantly, the tech. I treat my recording equipment like organs outside my body. I brought 2 Pelican 1510 cases into the cabin. Inside, nestled in pick and pluck foam, lay my livelihood. A Sound Devices Mix Pre 6.2 recorder, a matched pair of Sennheiser MKH 8020 omnidirectional microphones, and my pride and joy, a specialized parabolic dish for long-range capture. The interior of the cabin was freezing, colder than the outside because the air had been trapped and stagnant for weeks. It smelled of old wood smoke and dust. I found the wood stove, a cast-iron beast from the 1970s, and got a fire going with some birch bark and kiln-dried logs stacked against the wall. The smoke drafted properly, thank God. Within 20 minutes, the smell of burning birch, sweet and acrid, began to fill the room, masking the stale scent of abandonment. I set up my base of operations on the singular sturdy pine table near the south window. I clamped the microphone stands to the edge of the porch outside, running the XLR cables through a small gap in the window frame, which I sealed with gaffer tape to prevent drafts. I put on my headphones Sony MDR 7500 SIXS, the industry standard. I wanted to check the noise floor. I turned the gain up on the mix pre. Usually, even in remote areas, you hear something. The wind in the upper canopy, the shifting of snow, the distant, low-frequency rumble of a jet stream overhead. But through the headphones, I heard nothing. The meters on the recorder did not even flicker. It was a flat line. The noise floor was so low it was technically unnatural. It was like the forest was holding its breath. Weird, I muttered. My voice sounded too loud in the cabin. The sound waves hit the log walls and died instantly, absorbed by the rough wood. I took the headphones off and started dinner. I boiled snow melt on the Coleman stove, the hiss of the blue flame providing a comforting layer of white noise. I made a pouch of Mountain House beef stew. I ate it standing by the window, watching the light die. The sunset in the north is violent. Bruised purples and bloody oranges that fade into a gray that feels like iron. As I chewed the slightly rubbery rehydrated beef, I saw something near the tree line, about 70 meters out. It was just a shape, a vertical line that was slightly darker than the tree trunks around it. I squinted. My vision is 20/20, but the twilight plays tricks. The Purkinje effect, where your eyes shift from cone to rod vision, desaturates color and messes with depth perception. I told myself it was a snag, a dead tree trunk broken off halfway up, or maybe a trick of the light on a spruce bough. But the rational part of my brain, the part that calculates angles and distances, whispered a correction. Trees do not wear parkas. I put the spoon down. I grabbed my Nikon binoculars from the table and focused them on the spot. The lenses were cold against my eye sockets. I dialed in the focus wheel. Spruce. Spruce. Snow. Rock. Spruce. Nothing. Whatever shadow I had seen was gone. Or, more likely, it had never been there. Just a shadow cast by the setting sun that vanished as the angle of light shifted. Pareidolia, I said aloud. The psychological phenomenon of seeing patterns, specifically faces or human shapes, where none exist. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. Better to mistake a bush for a bear than a bear for a bush. My brain was just calibrating to the isolation. I finished my stew, cleaned the spoon with snow, and tossed the wrapper in the trash bag. But I did not unlock the door to go outside for a final pee. I used the empty Gatorade bottle I kept for emergencies. I told myself it was because of the cold. Just the cold. I did not want to let the heat out. That was the first lie. The next morning, the sun was blinding. The snow reflected 90% of the UV radiation, turning the world into an overexposed photograph. I felt foolish for my unease the night before. The forest looked pristine, innocent. A winter wonderland. I spent the morning deploying the drop rigs. These are autonomous recording units I strapped to trees deep in the woods to capture sound over 24 hours. I strapped on my snowshoes, Tubbs mountaineers, and hiked about a kilometer east of the cabin. The physical exertion felt good. I could feel the sweat wicking into my base layer. The air tasted like dry ice. I found a perfect spot, a small clearing surrounded by old-growth pines, and strapped the recorder to a trunk about 6 feet up. I was calibrating the input levels when I smelled it. In the crisp, sterile air of the tundra, smells are rare. You smell pine, you smell cold, which is really just ozone, and maybe the musk of an animal if you re-upwind. But this smell was complex. It was organic but wrong. It smelled like wet wool, and copper, old pennies, and underneath that something sweet like rotting apples. I stopped moving. I took off my headphones. "Hello," I called out. My voice cracked slightly. Silence. Then a sound. Not from the woods, but from behind me. Crunch. I spun around, my snowshoes tangling slightly, almost tripping me. Standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 20 meters away, was a man. He did not look like a hiker. He did not look like a hunter. He was wearing a mishmash of gear that did not make sense. A heavy, faded red plaid jacket that looked like it was from the 1980s, torn at the shoulder and repaired with silver duct tape. His pants were oversized gray wool, tucked into black rubber muck boots that were wholly inadequate for 25-degree weather. He had no hat. His hair was long, greasy, and frozen in clumps where the sweat had turned to ice. But it was his stance that triggered my uncanny valley response. He was not standing with his weight distributed evenly. He was leaning forward, almost to a tipping point, his arms hanging limp at his sides, palms facing backward. "Can I help you?" I asked. I tried to project authority. The voice of a man who belongs here. The man did not blink. His eyes were wide, watery, and incredibly pale blue. His skin was windburned to a dark, leathery red, but his lips were cracked and white. He did not answer. He just watched me, his head tilted slightly to the left, like a bird listening for a worm. I said, "Can I help you?" "You on private land." I lied. It was Crown land, but he did not need to know that. The man took a step forward. His movement was jerky. His knee raised too high, his foot slapped the snow too hard. It was like watching a bad marionette. "Water," he croaked. The voice was dry, scraping like sandpaper. "Water," he repeated. "The pump is frozen." I pointed back towards the way I came, but vaguely, away from the cabin. There's a stream about 2 clicks south. Runs fast, should not be frozen in the center. He did not look where I pointed. He kept his eyes locked on my face, specifically on my mouth. You possess filtration? The phrasing was odd, archaic. You possess. I have a life straw, I said, patting my chest pocket. I did not. I had a full hydration pack on my back, but I was not going to offer it. Every alarm bell in my primate brain was screaming, predator, predator, predator. Here. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a granola bar, a Cliff Bar, chocolate chip. I tossed it onto the snow between us. Take that. I do not have water to spare. The man looked at the Cliff Bar. He did not bend down to pick it up. He looked back at me. Then his face did something terrible. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It was just the lower half of his face engaging. The lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were stained dark brown, almost black. Generosity, he whispered. Then, without turning around, he began to back away. He stepped backward into the tree line, maintaining eye contact the entire time. He moved smoothly now, gliding backward over the uneven snow as if he were on rails. 1 second he was there. The next, the dense spruce boughs swallowed him. I stood there for 5 minutes, clutching my recorder like a weapon. I listened. I should have heard him walking away. The snow was crunchy. I should have heard the brush snapping. But I heard nothing. Just the high-pitched whine of the wind picking up. I abandoned the drop rig. I turned and walked back to the cabin. I did not run. Running triggers the chase instinct, but I walked fast, checking over my shoulder every 10 paces. When I got back to the cabin, I locked the heavy deadbolt. Then I dragged the heavy oak table in front of the door. I took my hunting knife, a Ka-bar fixed blade, out of my bag and set it on the table next to my laptop. I told myself he was just a squatter, some mentally ill hermit living off the grid. Northern Ontario is full of them. Strange guys who fled society to live in shacks and drink moonshine. He was probably just dehydrated and socially awkward. I tried to edit my field notes on the laptop. Subject: Ambience 001. Location: Grid 44. But my hands were shaking so bad I could not hit the keys. Night fell at 4:45 p.m. Darkness in the city is never total. There is always ambient light pollution, the orange glow of sodium streetlights reflecting off the clouds. Here, darkness is absolute. It is a physical weight. I had covered the windows. The cabin had flimsy cotton curtains that did nothing, so I had taped black garbage bags over the glass panes. I did not want anyone to see inside. I did not want to become a silhouette in a light box. I sat in the corner of the room, furthest from the door, with the wood stove to my left. I had the Coleman lantern turned down to a low hiss, casting long, jittery shadows. I was not sleeping. I had a thermos of coffee and I was wired. 9:00 p.m. The wind picked up. The cabin creaked. The thermal expansion and contraction of the logs sounded like gunshots. Pop, crack. I jumped every time. 11:23 p.m. I heard it. It started softly. A scratching sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the north wall. The wall behind the wood stove. I held my breath. It sounded like branches brushing against the logs. That is all. Just the wind blowing a spruce branch against the rough wood. I waited. The scratching stopped. Then it started again. On the east wall. Then the south wall. Whatever it was circling the cabin. And it was moving fast. Too fast for a man in deep snow. It was covering 20 feet in seconds. I looked at my audio recorder on the table. The mix pre was still on, connected to the shotgun mic I had pointed at the door. The LED display was dancing. It was picking up frequencies I could not hear. Low end. Infrasound. The bars were peaking in the red at 10 Hz. Infrasound can cause feelings of dread, nausea, and paranoia in humans. That it, I thought, clutching the scientific fact like a lifeline. A low pressure system. Or a generator hum from somewhere distant. Messing with my inner ear. 12:15 a.m. The footsteps started on the porch. These were not the subtle, sliding steps of the man in the woods. These were heavy, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. The wooden planks of the porch groaned under massive weight. I gripped the handle of the Ka bar until my knuckles turned white. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door. I could hear breathing. It was not human breathing. It was wet, rattling. It sounded like a slurry of fluid in a lung. Hooray! Hooray! I stared at the doorknob. A simple brass quickset knob. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to turn. The metal groaned. Turned to the right. Locked. Turned to the left. Locked. Then the pushing started. The door bowed inward. The wood of the frame creaked in protest. I watched the heavy oak table I had shoved against it slide, just an inch across the floorboards. Screech. Go away! I screamed. My voice sounded thin, pathetic. I have a satellite phone. I've called the OPP. I did not have a satellite phone. I had a Garmin in reach, but I had not activated the SOS because I was not injured. I was just scared. And you do not call in a helicopter rescue for being scared. The pushing stopped instantly. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then, a voice. It did not come from outside the door. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere, vibrating the very logs of the cabin. It was the man's voice, but pitched down, distorted. Generosity, it mimicked. Then a giggle. A high, wet, childish giggle that dissolved into a cough. I scrambled back, pressing my spine against the rough logs of the far wall. I pulled my knees to my chest. I closed my eyes. Do not look. If you do not see it, it's not real. It's sleep deprivation. It's carbon monoxide poisoning. Check the detector. I cracked one eye open. The CO detector on the ceiling was silent. The little green light blinked reassuringly. This was real. For the next 4 hours, I did not move. I listened to the creature, the man, the thing explore the exterior of my sanctuary. I heard it climb onto the roof. The tin sheets buckled under the weight. It walked directly over my head. The claws, it sounded like claws now, hard ceramic tapping, clicking on the metal. It stopped directly above the stovepipe. I stared at the black iron of the wood stove. Please do not come down the chimney. Please God. Some soot fell into the firebox. Hiss. Then it moved on. I heard it tapping on the windows. Tap, tap, tap. Gentle, polite, like it was checking the glass for weakness. The black garbage bags over the windows rustled as if something was breathing against the glass from the outside. I needed to pee so bad my bladder felt like it would burst. I peed right there in my pants. I did not care. The warm wetness was the only thing that felt real. The smell of urine mixed with the wood smoke. I sat in my own filth, shivering, clutching a knife, waiting for the glass to shatter. But it never did. The thing was not trying to get in anymore. It was playing. It was savoring the terror. It was feeding on the fear just as much as it would have fed on my flesh. It knew I was in there. It knew I was awake. And around 4 o'clock a.m., just as the first hint of gray started to bleed into the sky, it whispered one last thing close to the window by my head. Record this. The sun came up at 7:12 a.m. I know the exact minute because I had been staring at the digital clock on the MixPre for 3 hours. When the first beam of direct sunlight hit the floorboards, the tension in the cabin snapped. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, evaporating like mist. The sounds of the forest returned. A raven croaked. The wind sighed in the trees. Normal sounds. I waited another hour. Then I stood up. My legs were cramped and stiff. My pants were stiff with dried urine. I moved the table. I unlocked the door. I threw it open, knife raised, ready to die. There was nothing. Just the blinding white snow. I stepped out onto the porch. I looked down at the snow. There should have been footprints. Messy, chaotic tracks from where it had paced and circled. There were tracks. But they were not boots. They were naked human feet. Huge, splayed footprints, easily size 15, sunk deep into the hard-packed snow. The toes were elongated, digging in like talons. They circled the entire cabin. A perfect, unbroken ring of footprints. And in the center of the yard, where I had stood the day before, there was a pile of something. I walked over to it, my boots crunching loudly. It was my drop rig, the recorder I had left in the woods. It had been ripped from the tree. The heavy plastic casing was chewed, gnawed on with teeth marks that went straight through the hard polycarbonate. But the SD card slot was untouched. I did not pack. I threw everything I could carry into the back of the 4Runner. I left the stove. I left the food. I left the tent. I did not care. I jumped into the driver's seat and keyed the ignition. The engine roared to life. Thank you, Toyota. I tore down the logging road, fishtailing on the ice, hitting 80 kilometers per hour on a road designed for 30. I did not look in the rearview mirror until I hit the pavement of Highway 584. I drove straight to the OPP detachment in Thunder Bay. I walked in, smelling like piss and wood smoke, wild-eyed. I told the officer at the desk that someone was harassing campers near Nakina. He looked at me with that weary, cop look. Harassing? Did he threaten you? He circled my cabin all night. He walked on the roof. The officer took notes. Did you see him? I saw him the day before. He looked wrong. Any physical contact? No. Look, sir. Likely just a local squatter. Or maybe a bear. Bears get curious about cabins. Bears do not speak. I yelled. Bears do not have human feet. He stopped writing. He looked at my wet pants. He tapped his pen. We'll send a patrol car up to check the area when the roads are clear. Why do not you go home, get some sleep? They never found anything. I called a week later. They said the cabin was empty. No footprints. Fresh snow had covered them. No signs of forced entry. My panic attack, as they called it, was noted and filed. But I have the SD card. The one from the chewed-up recorder. I did not listen to it for 3 months. Kept it in a drawer, wrapped in tinfoil. But one night, after a bottle of wine, I put it into my computer. The waveform appeared. The first 10 hours are silence. Wind. Nature. Then, at timestamp 2:44:12, the pattern changes. There is a sound. Sounds like a voice very close to the microphone. The mic was 12 feet up a tree. The voice whispers, in perfect, high-fidelity audio, Elias. It knew my name, and underneath the voice, there is a frequency. A low, thrumming tone at 14 hertz. I ran it through a spectral analyzer. The visual representation of the sound wave, the spectrogram, does not look like static. Creates a shape. When I look at the screen, the sound waves form a jagged, crude image of a smiling mouth. I do not go into the quiet anymore. I live near the Gardiner Expressway. I sleep with a white noise machine set to industrial fan, because I know that in the silence he is still walking, and he is waiting for me to listen again.